I'm so excited for this topic. I couldn't decide if I should go vertical or horizontal, but I'm just going to keep it vertical because yesterday's video did really well and we were in vertical. Were we? Jay says, okay. Okay. The greatest, sorry, I keep getting out of frame, but I don't know where to go. Okay, I'm going to be moving. So I took this debate between Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson, mediated by Alex O'Connor. I put it into Descript, which transcribe the whole video. So then I put on subtitles. This is a very comprehensive video. We're going to pause it we're going to pause it every time I think we should. Okay. And I'm going to break down not line by line, but paragraph by paragraph, what Jordan Peterson is saying, or what I believe he is saying. The goal of this debate goes around the idea of truth. Now, truth in philosophy has many layers. The most common one that we use in everyday life is like empirical truth. And essentially, it's what's been confirmed as we know it. No, this is not me coping or fucking running circles to make Jordan Peterson work. No, it's none of that. It literally isn't. I feel for this man, though, not gonna lie, because I know what it's like to try to articulate something that like isn't translating. It's not that it's necessarily wrong. It's that it's way too complex. Jordan Peterson is known for many things, writing Clean Your Room, writing many books. But he got popular in 2016. Well, he was popular before that with his lectures online. He teaches psychology at the university level, or did. Now he started like a supposedly really, really good school. It's competing with colleges. I don't know much about it yet, so it's too new. It's not accredited. Is that what we call it? Accredited, yeah. It's not accredited yet, but it's a lot of really well-known like Harvard professors, whatever. Anyways, he got popular for Bill 16 in 2016, I think, which was, I don't want to go there. Okay. This video is not about it. Okay. Then he went through so many debates where people misinterpreted what he said, but it was obvious to everybody. One example is the Kathy Newman debate. And it's a really good like example of what happens with people going into a debate with two separate goals. And I don't mean two separate, like they each want to beat each other. That's not what I mean. I mean, like somebody wants to make somebody look insane, or they believe somebody's like a demon. So they want to, so what you're saying, you know what I mean? I don't feel like I need to elaborate. It happens all the time. In the recent years, people in the debate world, philosophy world, depends on who you ask, more specifically like YouTube, some of the great ones are Sam Harris, Alex O'Connor himself, some other people I can't think of off the top of my head. Destiny's one of them. There had been this thing going around that like Peterson has lost his mind. And I know what it looks like when somebody loses their mind pretty well. And I also know what it looks like when somebody thinks very deeply about an issue and doesn't know how to articulate it. Me. um, but Jordan Peterson, in this debate specifically, is giving credit to like the left-leaning ideology. When I say left-leaning or Republican or anything political, I'm not saying it in a way that's ideological. I'm really just talking about the way that people get to a solution or think about a problem. So if I haven't made that clear, I'm making it clear now. Jordan will use terms like postmodernism, and he will also use postmodernism when he's like triggered, it appears. And it's like, oh, here we go with your Marxist, whatever. I feel for him, okay? When he says like, see, I don't know if there's like a better way to articulate it other than postmodernism will, how would I define that? Actually, I was not prepared for that. Postmodern, just go with what comes to my mind. Postmodernism I feel like it was like the reaction to like truth. Am I wrong? Hold on. I need a second to read. No, okay, I'm right. Postmodernism is a wide-ranging term that describes a reaction to the ideas, values of modernism and the period that followed. It's characterized by a skepticism of universal truths and objective reality. And that's where people have a tendency to be like, they're crazy. I'll give you an example. My truth is truth, and your truth is your truth. And it's like, well, they can't both be true, and that's wrong. And something that bothered me is that when I would see Sam Harris, Alex O'Connor, and whoever else kind of poke fun at Jordan Peterson, who I really have only been watching as of recently, I was like, that's weird. Like in a debate space where I thought everybody values fact, complexity, and showing your work. I was like, how are they missing this? Does this mean that I'm right? No, it doesn't. But I find if you jump to, oh, that person doesn't know what they're talking about, or these sort of like character assertions right away, I feel like you could be missing out on like maybe that person knows something that you don't know, you know? So it's like, I try to take people at their word. I like whatever you say to me in the moment, like, all right, baby, let's go. And I don't feel like they were doing that with Jordan Peterson. And it almost appeared like it was this rumor that he would just say word salad. And as somebody who would transcribe debates and stuff, like I go through a lot of content, like too much. I need to go outside. But I do that for my other job. So it's like, although I never watched, it's not that I never watched him. It's that when I would get requests for something written in the style of what he would write about, it required a lot more depth, because at one point I did kind of study the structure of how he would do it, and then I would take it with what I knew. And something I had said about him was that he's very particular about language. And like the man's brilliant, whether you like him or not. it is, everybody should strive to be able to come up with that sort of justification or just how he asks a question. There's an art to the way he structures it. And it's, when I say profound, I mean he will use less words to articulate a point. And it's like, well, he says word salad. I hear you. But a lot of the stuff that he's been talking about in the more recent era is different systems coming together. That's a very hard topic to discuss, especially when you don't believe that it's been put out there. It has. In integral theory is one of them. There's many, but that's one of them. So it's like when you talk to people who have decided this belief about somebody, oh, he's just saying word salad in this, you immediately cut yourself off from understanding what that person is trying to say. You see it when they cut him off, and it's like, you see it when they make videos, which I don't know if we'll get to the part where I bring up Alex O'Connor's critique and how it's wrong in my worldview. No, like actually, it goes into all the types of truths, and he misinterpreted what he said, pulled it out of context. I'm assuming because people just take what others say and they assume that has to be true because maybe you value them. Maybe it's somebody who's been around longer than Jordan Peterson. I've done it. But anyways, my mouth is dry. Anyways, where was I going with that? I like Jordan Peterson. He's a wise man. And to at least look into what he says. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to do it, okay? It's going to take a long time. But something while I was prepping for this, like after I made the video yesterday, I was listening to it while I went to sleep. I was like, whoa, like I thought I had it down, and it's like that much layered. And I'm like, how the fuck am I supposed to do this? And I was like, we'll just keep formal debate. That's the easiest, I think, to follow. And then we'll just pause it part by part. The issue is that it's a misconception of truth. I believe that's what I diagnosed it at this point in time. And like, it's like, there can only be one truth. I'll give you an example. When you're dealing with truth, different types of truth require different ways of getting to the truth. Empirical evidence, you have the scientific method. Okay, what's that? You observe, create a hypothesis, gather evidence, do what do you call it when you test it, analyze it, that sort of thing. But there's also let me pull that up because I'm gonna fuck that up. Truth. What is pragmatic? Pragmatic, I believe, is when you look at look at the object. I don't like that. Okay, maybe not. Should I ask ChatGPT? Am I gonna fuck it up? I googled it and it's already stressing me out. What are... Hold on. I only have one hand. What are different types of truth and how to measure it? It's one of the topics in philosophy I absolutely despise. I just like to operate like we're all talking about the regular one. Because remember how I said Jordan's talking about many different systems? When you're breaking down certain philosophical topics, truth knowledge. Okay. It splits off into like 4 different fucking things. More than that. It's probably like well over 12. So when you have a different system, how do you get to an objective truth, if you will always have more than one thing. And so if you fuck up what system you're in, we're not talking the same language. And it's like very specific. I don't even know it that well. Okay, a claim is true if it corresponds to reality or the actual state of affairs. It matches the facts of the external world. That's correspondence truth. You have coherence truth. A claim is true if it's coherent with a system of beliefs or propositions, meaning it logically fits with what is already known and accepted. Like, that sounds the same to me, does it not? Pragmatic truth. A claim is true if it works or proves useful in practical applications, focuses on outcomes rather than absolute correspondence with reality. Constructivist or relativist truth. A claim is true based on social agreement or cultural context, like a majority. Isn't that terrifying? Phenomenological truth. A claim is true if it accurately represents a person's subjective experience or inner reality. It focuses on personal perceptions and feelings. Hope they're not in a psychosis. Moral or ethical truth. A claim is considered true if it aligns with moral principles or ethical reasoning about what is right or good. This is somebody consistent in their moral framework. Arguably never happens. A claim is true if it can be tested, potentially falsified, and replicated under controlled conditions. That's scientific or falsifiable truth. So, summary, correspondence truth relies on empirical evidence. That is our Richard Dawkins. Coherence truth depends on logical consistency. This is like in debate. Pragmatic truth is validated by practical effectiveness. You get the idea. Okay. So, going back. Do I buy? Probably like the video if you guys haven't liked it already. Love you. I'm hopeful for the future. I'm just saying. If these two minds can come to a consensus, a language will evolve. I've been talking about this phenomenon. I probably look crazy. That's okay. It's not off the table. I jokingly say that because pretty much at this point, I'm like, just trust me, bro. It's like, have I ever lied to you? No, you always want to keep an open mind, right? Operate in gray. Anyways, so there's this thing that language literally cannot define. We cannot define it. I'm not saying that because I suck at speaking, which that's partly it, but I'm saying it because it doesn't exist. It literally does not exist, okay? But anyways, let's bring it back, okay? The video today. Their propositions, okay? Where's my Google Doc? I have 3. That concerns me. What did I even fucking, excuse my language. What did I title this video? Is myth true? Unclear. Are myths hardwired? You know how long it took me to come up with this title? It took me so long to come up with this title, people. I'm like, what is the best way that I can come up with like a summary of all of it so I don't lose people on Jordan's fucking assessment? And when we talk about myths, when we talk about religion, when we talk about theories, a dog. There's a difference between something that is true in the context of did it happen, which Dawkins is going to be like, did it? Okay, there's that, but then there's also another layer, and that's this is why they talk past each other. Sorry, I hear my dog barking. Are you good? You can't have the pasta. Stresses me out. Okay, so in the beginning of the video, they're going to be talking about memes and archetypes. Did I even read the fucking my dog? Hold on. Hello? I can't hear if she's outside, but my dad's in the kitchen. Hi, Dad. Okay, so the insights within biblical and mythological stories provide truths about human nature and society that are as valuable as those derived from scientific inquiry. Okay, who's in the affirmative? Who's in the negative? Well, if we just think about it, okay, everybody's saying this shit about Jordan, right? I explained it in the beginning. Everybody's like, he sounds crazy. I'm going to assume that Jordan is going to be in the affirmative. Why? Because he holds the burden of proof. Can this switch? Yes, but it's obvious. Because if you just step back and look at the whole thing, you're like, why would Richard Dawkins try to prove something to Jordan, right? But that's not to say that when you're in the negative position, you are not also substantiating claims. If you're in the negative position, you're technically the skeptic, if you will, which means that if you're going to say, I don't think that's good evidence, you have to give me an instance that shows that that's not substantial. It's more obvious than I'm making it sound. Jordan Peterson is going to argue about biblical stories and myths and how they encode deep truths about human nature, societal dynamics, and moral values. But the moral values is not going to be like a centered theme. These truths are not always scientifically verifiable, but they also guide human behavior and understanding of the world. Richard Dawkins he's going to be like, I don't think that's good enough proof because anybody could say blah, blah, blah. He believes that truth is measured, that you can see it it's in your reality. You can see it, you can measure it. Shit, you can touch it, not actually, but like you can, there's different ways on how to solve it, or there's different ways on how to identify it, calculate it sometimes, measure it is a better word, sorry. When they're talking about archetypes, it's that shared cognitive process, morals. I'll pause it though. I can hear my dog barking. Okay, I did put subtitles on it. I know I said that in the beginning, but if you just joined, there will be subtitles, so it's going to be a lot easier to follow. We also have Alex O'Connor, who's really good at summarizing both people's positions. So,
contact, in the spirit of finding those overlapping circles of interest between you two, will be the similarities, if there are any, between the concept of a meme and the concept of an archetype. So, Professor Dawkins, perhaps you can begin by telling us, what is a meme?
A meme is a virus of the mind. So it's something that spreads because it spreads because it spreads. It's something that spreads by imitation. As I understand it, an archetype is quite different from that, because an archetype is something which all humans have as a virtue of being human, something that's built in. So it's not something that spreads as an epidemic. It's something that we all have anyway. And I suppose that it could turn into a meme, but I would think it would be muddying the waters to even say that there's something very much in common between an archetype and a meme.
Okay, let's just... Okay, so archetypes. I'm going to be using the hero myth for the sake of this part of the video, because this is going to probably take us a while. The hero myth is a story that has traveled culturally and throughout time that we all understand. When I first heard archetype, I was like, wait, are we talking about like different versions of, you know, when they take the top 10 archetype test? I'm just like, what they're talking about is historical cultural narratives that have traveled through time. Literally, we'll still share them, but we're going to focus on the hero myth because I feel like that one's probably the number one. When he's talking about memes, he wrote The Selfish Gene. It was a book back in the 80s or whatever, which he didn't come up with the word. He came up with the concept of it, but not in the way that we understand it today. But when we think about memes, it's like a photo, some sort of artwork that people collectively get. But what makes a meme viral? It has to be able to adapt in multiple cultural scenarios or multiple perspectives, right? And people can make variations of it. And that's how it grows in popularity. Personally, as a hard determinist, I see all of this as an awareness of these causal chains. You're like, Tori, what the fuck? Yeah. Yeah. Anything that I feel like it's the human consciousness becoming aware that things are going a certain way and we're all kind of getting hit with it like a ball and a stick. Okay, we're all connected. Bro,
Memes are not embedded into the psychology of people as
No,
naturally
they are.
Bro, just to be clear, okay, archetypes, it's the same and it's traveling through time. The memes, it's like it comes out of nowhere and people catch on to it, right?
They're things like the backwards baseball hat, which is not an archetype. I mean, it's something that becomes fashionable and spreads out as an epidemic around the population, which is very different from an archetype, which is sort of built in.
Yes, I've heard you in the past, Dr. Peterson, say that a meme is very similar, if not almost identical to an archetype, almost as if you kept pushing the idea of what a meme is, you might end up with an archetype. But
well,
perhaps not.
I think maybe the appropriate way of tying the two ideas together, given what Dr. Dawkins just said, is to notice the fact that something spreads because it catches, right? And so things catch because they have an emotional resonance. And so they attract people's interest. And so they attract them in an exploratory manner. That'd be one way of thinking about it. That would be attraction on the positive emotion side, or they attract them on the negative emotion side. And so that would loop the idea of the catchiness of a idea, a meme, let's say, with...
Okay, he's going. So he's describing all the ways in which makes a meme viral. I'm going to use the term viral because I feel like it makes it easier to picture. It's like, oh, we relate with this meme because it reminds us of an awkward moment, or which would be more negative if you would. But then there's like positive emotions where it's funny or whatever. But there's something fundamental that allows us all to pick up on it. It's different cultural context, right? Because it has to go through different systems in order to be viral. Can't just go to like Wisconsin. Okay. Keep going.
The more underlying motivational structures. And as the idea is more related to the action of underlying biological motivational structures, it becomes more and more expression of something that's instinctual and archetypal. Like Jung defined an archetype essentially as something like the manifestation of an instinct in image and then also in behavior. So the deepest
Instinct, we have like 3 parts of our brain. Instinct, the lizard brain, behaves.
level is something like the instinct, and that would be motivational or emotional drive. And then there's a manifestation of that in imagination and behavior, and it's more culturally constructed there. And you could also imagine that there are depths of these ideas. The baseball hat idea, for example, that would be something that's manifesting itself at a fairly shallow level. But
Okay, now he's explaining the levels of these things. It's like a fashion trend is quick ending, whatever. But there's other ones that are more embedded, hypothesizing that possibly memes have a more biological imperative, if you would, that we might not be consciously aware of, that we can all collectively find something in it. Okay.
there's a reason that the backwards baseball hat caught on. You know, it speaks of the moment for whatever reason. And it's linked to the biology through the fact that it captures interest for some reason.
So perhaps something like the archetype being a more fundamental psychological concept that memes can then play upon. The backwards catches on.
Well, that seems implausible to me, but the idea that the archetype could be a reason why some memes spread, that seems to me to be plausible if you believe in archetypes at all. Yeah.
We need Dawkins to get this shit. Okay. I said this in the other video. Richard Dawkins is our most literal empiricist, scientist, very grounded. If Jordan Peterson can convey to him about what he is trying to articulate, Dawkins will be able to put it in language that is almost, I don't want to say mathematical, but almost like he won't allow any fluff, right? But the issue is that there's many things, bias being one of them. He sounds crazy. Okay, I see it. I know. Jordan, if you're watching this, you should probably let people know that you're not mentally insane. I don't know. Like, I don't think he picks up on the fact that people think he's insane. Because if he did, you would think that he would say that before he goes off into these different branches, because most people are not going to be able to follow it. Because focus, okay, we're all ADD.
But you prefer to think of memes, or you do think of memes as, you refer to them as a virus.
Yes,
it doesn't have to have a negative connotation.
It's the spreadability which is the salient point. And if chiming in with an archetype is a reason why they might spread, then I could go with that.
Yeah, and presumably archetypes don't act in the same way. They don't spread through cultures. They don't sort of grow up and die in individual generations. They're much more foundational than that.
I think you have to think about it hierarchically. You know, that there's something in the structure that would make itself manifest as an archetype. There's something that's foundational and deep that wouldn't change any faster in a sense than the species itself changes. But then there would be efflorescences of that idea that would be less permanent as they were more attuned to the specific.
So something about an archetype is rooted, is embedded. There's some truth to it that's allowing it to reappear at different times, if you will. He's saying that there's elements of it that might have been different under different cultures, but it doesn't refute that fundamental sameness, or he's trying to prove some sort of biological thing. So how do I summarize this? Is like, how do I make this as simple as possible? There's something in humans that when trying to articulate a certain experience, they can only do through pictures. They can only do with trying to get on a shared collective of something. And at its basic terminology, if you will, we come up with these stories. It's like we can only do it in a story or narrative way. It's a little abstract, but it's there. Okay.
Of the time. So And that's not saying anything different, really, than saying that there are ideas that make themselves manifest at different levels of depth, which is also a complex thing. Like it's not that easy to specify what makes an idea deep, which makes it more archetypal, and what makes it transient and trivial. There's a relationship between such ideas. There's no idea so trivial that it doesn't touch the depths, because no one would care about it.
So something that's like that I've been saying just on this point, just to sprinkle a little crazy, is that something like a tradition, something that is repeated, relatively the same throughout history, to me, is also the same as when you test a hypothesis in science. You know, people are doing it because it probably works in some regard. Not to me, but I can understand that there's a large proportion of people that find this to be true. It would be ignorant for me to say it can't be true because of the literal definite. It's ignorant, and it's bordering on delusional. I know, as an atheist.
Right. So, but archetypal ideas do have that capacity to spread virally and to rise and fall. You see that, I think you see that in the history of religious ideas. You know, that religious ideas can be very catching, because otherwise they wouldn't spread. Now, there's variation in them, like there is in languages, but there's also something that's core that makes them identifiable, let's say, as religious ideas rather than as any other sort of idea. I mean, one of the things I was really interested about, I sent you an email at one time asking you if you had read Mircea Eliade, especially The Sacred and the Profane, but he also has a 3-book series called A History of Religious Ideas. And I really like A History of Religious Ideas. It's a great book. And one of the things it does is analyze a particular widespread religious motif, which is the battle between the gods in heaven. You see this idea in many, many cultures, and each god is the expression of a mode of perception or a mode of being. And what you see happening in a multitude of cultures is that there are many, many ways of seeing the world and acting in it that are metamorphized into something divine. And as cultures mingle and mix, their gods compete in the space of the imagination, and something like a hierarchy forms. That's the emergence of something like monotheism. And the associate...
So we've been talking a little bit about the concept of a meme. I think it would be strange to be suspicious of the idea that memes are a thing that do exist and transmit, but there might be more room for suspicion about this concept of the archetype. I was wondering, Professor Dawkins, what you think about the concept of archetypes in general.
Well, for example, if we take the idea of the gods competing with each other, that I take it is a proper archetype, because it's present in all cultures. I presume you mean it's something that's built in genetically, ultimately, I suppose, that something about our brains makes different cultures invent the same kinds of religious symbols.
Do you see why I'm literally like, I need Richard Dawkins to understand this? He just put that in a way that makes sense to everybody. Did he not? We need these brilliant minds on the side of art history, let me tell you.
Yes.
And things like a battle between gods is one.
That's one.
There might be others. It's not that convincing. I mean, it's such an obvious thing because we have human battles, and therefore an idea of battles between gods would not be that implausible. So it doesn't strike me as a very penetrating observation.
Okay, so Richard is skeptic, don't forget. So he's saying like, okay, there's something that has been repeated around the world over time. I don't find it that convincing. Jordan is going to have to explain it as a concept of science or genetics, or it has to, because Richard Dawkins talks about the genes and genetics and repetition. How can Jordan come up with a way that substantiates that claim in science? I'll tell you how, okay? Just me spewing shit. What about when the mind breaks down? Jordan, Okay. Psychologist over here. I've witnessed it firsthand. I'm sure he has too when it comes to fragmented mind. Why is it that we always under stress start to catastrophize, if you will? This and that. Two things, black and white, whatever. Why is it? And obviously, I'm not putting it in a constructive argument, but just ways to think about it. Because when we say archetypes, it's like myths, religious myths. Okay. We have to, there's got to be a reason that people fall into this. I call it delusional thinking on a spectrum, but that's just me. Okay. So I don't know. He's got to explain it in a way that is more proof to this repetition of gene and science and whatever.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting about it, the thing that's been interesting to me about it is to start to understand the nature of the universal themes and how they're expressed in stories. I mean, one of the things I wanted to explore with you, because I think this is an idea that's at the core of the cultural conflict, is the postmodern types seem to have stumbled onto something which I actually think is true. And they're
You hear that? Love it.
not the only discipline that's come to this realization, because you can see it emerging in neuroscience and in AI and in robotics as well, that we see the world of facts through something that when described as a story, because we have to prioritize our perceptions. We have to prioritize facts. And as far as I can tell, a story is a verbal account of how our perceptions and the facts that we encounter are prioritized. So, for example, when you go see a movie, the movie has a hero. And what the writers do is they show you how the hero prioritizes his perceptions, what he attends to, and how he acts. And you derive from that the story of his life and his ethic.
Okay, I want to break it down in a way that I think is easier because I can make it personal right now. Okay. I want you to think of 4 perspectives or even just a quadrant. Okay. Tic-tac-toe, but just 1, 2, 3, 4. In one element, my perception, I have to call crisis. I always use this example, but I think it's the clearest one. I have to call crisis because family member is in a psychosis and they're violent. Okay. So I'm scared. They get put into the hospital. And when people observe them in that moment, they're calm and collected. So doctors are perceiving these people are calm and collected. They can be released. Actually, I should have said in the second one, it's their perception, like the person that's sick. Okay, that one's 3. So the second one is how they perceive reality. Okay. They're perceiving something. I don't know what it is, but it's not lining up with behavior. Okay. Then the third one is when doctors observe them and they say they're cool, calm, and collected, release them from the 5150. And then let's say, and so now that person who I called crisis on is now being discharged, actively psychotic. I hope they don't get mad at me and try to kill me. Is it true that I have a very real fear right now? Yeah. Is it true that they may have been calm and collected according to the doctors that observed them in third person? Also true. So which one do you solve? Okay. Which one do you solve? Do you prioritize one over the other? Because that's what we do. And it's wrong. It's wrong. You'd have to adopt all of those perceptions are true. So when it comes to relaying, when I have to explain this to you guys, how did I do that? I told you a story. Okay. That's all I can do. Because I can't take you, put you in my brain and play a replay, right? I only can tell you the story and hope you believe me. Why do you think I hate when people go into conversations like, they must be lying? No, don't think that way. Okay. So he's going into how story is literally the only way somebody can relay true information in one context. Okay.
And the idea that we have a story, that we have to organize our perceptions in priority, and that the description of that organization is a story, that's a very revolutionary idea. And I think the postmodernists got that right. And I think that's why we have a culture war going on, at least in part, is because the idea that we see the world through a story, or that a story is a description of the structure through which we see the world, I think that's accurate, because we have to prioritize our perceptions.
So, Professor Dawkins,
that's a tricky problem.
Well, I would prioritize my
They don't understand it. And I'm like, come on, please, we need everybody on board.
perceptions like this. The fact that I care about are the facts that are true and have evidence.
So Dawkins is saying the doctor in my scenario is the only truth one. I hope I don't die. I know in my perception, when I observed the behavior, that this is what they were going to do. And now you're telling me, no, the doctors are right. It's really easy to pretend you're calm to get let out. I'm just saying, although I understand it from an empirical position, absolutely. But man, it's really hard when behavior changes. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope it does.
Going for them. I'm not that interested in symbols. I think, Dr. Peterson, you're drunk on symbols.
Yes, you mentioned, I've heard that comment, yeah.
Yes. I mean, for example, I counted up in your book, We Who Wrestle with God, a number of references to Cain. There are 356 references to Cain in the book, and 20.
So we got our Dawkins, who is strictly literal, numerical, does not like symbols. I wonder how he feels about numbers. Sorry. Okay. So he says, you're drunk on symbols. You're drunk on symbols. I see a lot of people who are philosophers, if you will, or talking heads that will talk about consciousness. And I said quadrant, right? Because it makes it easier for you to understand what I'm trying to convey. He was using hierarchical structures, also important. And it's because we put things on a value system. How do you apply value to something? And that's a philosophical question I'm not trying to get into. But this is beautiful because we need somebody like Dawkins to be able to take in this sort of, I call it abstract thinking. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's when you have to think a little bit more outside the box to somebody that is strict with thinking in rules, thinking in confined, confined variables. Both are true, but nobody's ever been able to take both and articulate both. Why? Because the language doesn't exist. There's a reason that the language is symbols. I'm trying to relay it. I don't think it's making sense.
References to the descendants of Cain. You're obsessed with Cain because Cain is symbolic of evil. All the evil in the world you more or less blame Cain for. And this is Cain. I mean, you don't believe Cain actually existed, I presume.
Since I joined forces with the Daily Wire.
Okay, Dawkins is asking, just to make sure, probably testing his reality. You know this is not literally true. And this is the part where it gets complicated. They're both correct. This is a commercial.
Plus, we've built a...
Let me... Okay. I'm almost there. Okay.
Offering a 3-part series on success, how to strengthen your family and to strengthen your relationships and to aim up. People are struggling with depression and anxiety. We walk through all of that. How do you cope with it? What's the best pathway forward? In addition, we've explored biblical writings, their cultural
Okay, Jordan. Love you.
That's different. I realize
well,
that.
there are arcane types
Hold on.
plus today.
Got it.
Well, I think of Cain as, well,
Do you
existed.
believe Cain existed?
I think the pattern that Cain represents is an eternal pattern.
Translates to the story that Cain represents repeats from that time to present day, which is why people latch to it. Determinism in my head, but like, you know what I'm saying? Something about it is embedded. So if Jordan was to say that's not true and answer his question in the way that he's asking it, it already makes him dismiss the other type of truth. So there's a reason that he doesn't just say that. Okay, it's really important to pay attention.
And so
yes,
it's a
that's
higher
different.
level of existence.
That's different. I realize
well, there
that.
are Cain types who exist, and there
Yeah,
could well be
There are Cain types.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But Cain himself, I mean, you give the game away where you say in your book, Cain and Abel were the first humans to be born in the natural way. Now that betrays you as it were pretending you think they really existed, because you wouldn't have said.
Okay, so he's saying in your book, you are saying that something about them existed. And now that makes, he's essentially, he probably started the rumor about Jordan being religious and not an atheist, but he is an atheist. And if he's not an atheist, he's agnostic. Probably more agnostic. That's the one where you can still, like, it's not that God is necessarily not true, right? But which is a very, very leveled approach, okay?
They were born in a natural way, unless you were muddling up facts with symbols there, because you don't think that Cain and Abel existed.
Well, I don't. What do I think about Cain and Abel? I said, I think the pattern that they represent always exists. Always exists.
You understand that that's a different thing.
What's a different matter? A pattern that they represent, the conflict between brothers, the rivalry between brothers. This is a fundamental pattern, which yes, it's something that's there. But I care about facts. I mean, did they exist or did they not exist?
Well, I can imagine a situation where when the story was originated, that it referred to 2 actual brothers. But as the stories propagate across time, as they mutate, as they adapt, let's say, to the structure of human memory, they deepen and they become broader. And so then they become emblematic not only of the pattern of conflict that might characterize the original 2 brothers that the story was about, but about the conflict between brothers as such, and then the more fundamental levels of conflict that exist within human beings, which is what you see in more sophisticated literature. It's like the biblical accounts speak of fact in a factual manner upon occasion, but the biblical accounts also speak poetically and metaphorically and allegorically, and people who are sophisticated in biblical analysis have known this for centuries. The
meaning it can be interpreted different ways.
biblical literalists generally suffer from the problem that they don't even know what it means to be literalist. There's lots of unsophisticated ways of approaching a text.
Okay, let's see what Professor Dawkins thinks about that.
Well, I suppose I'm a literalist. I mean, and you give the game away when you say Cain and Abel were the first humans to be born in a natural way.
Well, I'm speaking allegorically there within the confines of the text. I mean, what I meant by that was that the way the story lays itself out is that Adam and Eve are created by God. And so they're not emblematic of the pattern of human beings that exist in fallen history. Within the confines of the text, the first 2 people who are genuine, who aren't creations of the divine, are Cain and Abel. And so for me, they're emblematic of the patterns of conflict that rip people apart in the world of history, in the world of normal history.
Professor Dawkins, I know you take particular umbrage with that statement that Cain and Abel were the first normally born human beings, but I think if I understand Dr. Peterson correctly, there are things that can be sort of true within a story. It's true that Sherlock Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street, and as far as I understand, that's maybe what you mean by the truth in the matter of Cain and Abel being the first naturally born humans. It's internal to the story.
Well, in the context of this story, they're the first two spirits or patterns you could think of, patterns of
When people say spirits in this context, I would say morals, moral value. Okay. You're like, what? When y'all be saying spirit, okay, you come off a little mystical, if I don't say so myself.
Perception and action.
Yes.
That characterize human existence in the fallen world, right? So they're emblematic of what happens in history outside of the whatever is meant by the pre-existent paradise.
At the same time, you must know, I know this comes up all of the time when somebody says, but did Cain and Abel really exist? And I know that you want to say that the story which
I think it's a silly question. I
It's
think
irrelevant.
it's like asking whether Raskolnikov existed in Crime and Punishment. Like it's not a trivial question, because you can answer yes and you can answer no. You can say, well, there was no such specific person as Raskolnikov. But
Okay, so just to be clear, he's identifying that it's an irrelevant question because the way that you get truth in an empirical sense is that you have to do the scientific method. We obviously, if you're smart, you know, it doesn't take a genius to understand what I'm trying to convey. When I was talking about the different types of truth, we went over the different ways that you evaluate the truth. Do you do the scientific method? Some do, some don't. When we are talking about religion, what Richard Dawkins and Alex O'Connor are asking is it true in an empirical sense? Can you actually measure it? Is there proof that they existed? Can you find their real handwritten notes? You know what I mean? Something that is tangible, something that clearly shows. It doesn't necessarily have to be tangible, but they find a thing, you know what I mean? It's like the obvious proof. But what Jordan is trying to explain is that that's not what I'm saying. But if I say no, you're going to write it off. And we're talking about a different category of truth. Okay.
It's not a helpful question, because the reason that Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is a masterpiece is because Raskolnikov was everywhere in Russia when Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment. And so Raskolnikov is hyper real, not real.
But to be clear, is that how you feel about Cain and Abel? That is to say, an
I think
identifiable
they're hyper real.
Homo sapiens called Cain,
It's
who
irrelevant.
murders his
In
brother.
a sense, it's irrelevant to me, because even if
I was shocked that under the impression that Richard Dawkins and Alex O'Connor are trained in philosophy, I was shocked that they missed this, honestly.
they were real, like, we don't know anything about them as
Well, of course they
historical
weren't real.
figures.
Of course, even if they weren't real, of course they weren't real.
Well, like I said, it could have been the case that when the story originated, way back when it originated, that the first people that were described by the first person who generated the seeds of the Cain and Abel story were referring to actual people. But it doesn't matter, because the text is being compressed and modified over a vast span of time, and it's accreted all sorts of meanings that certainly weren't part and parcel of whatever the original
Well,
story was.
take the point Alex was making. Within the confines of the story, Dostoevsky was a great writer. What makes you think the writers of Genesis were a great writer? I mean, who were they? We know nothing about them.
Well, I think they were great writers, because I think I understand the patterning of the stories and what it points to. I think the idea, for example, that Cain and Abel are emblematic of two opposed patterns of adaptation to the world is brilliant. It's almost brilliant beyond imagining, especially because the story is so insanely compressed. And it's certainly evident to me as a clinician that the patterns that are portrayed in the story of Cain and Abel play themselves out in the real world continually and terribly.
So now what Jordan is really trying to hone in on is that you need to stop looking at whether it's true or not in the empirical sense, and understand that there's a pattern. Lokai, stop. Come here, baby. Come here, mamas. There's a pattern that You see this scenario play out again and again before you write it off as not intrinsic to the human experience. Do you recognize that there's a pattern? This is not to be confused with like synchronicity, or I apologize if I'm saying it incorrectly. This is not the same as saying I see 444 angel numbers popping up in different places because I thought about it. It's much more complex than that. And I, Jordan, if you watch this, I would probably clarify that, because now it's going to sound like fucking, to the person that's not understanding the difference, the difference in truths. I feel like they're not operating into the correct hierarchical structure.
You think the author of that story in Genesis was a literary genius?
I think that there's a spirit of literary genius at work across millennia, crafting that story so that it has almost an infinite depth. How that relates to the original author or sequential authors.
Meaning that the story is able to touch on multi-perspectives, different cultures of the human experience in the same way that a meme does.
I don't know, because it's lost in the seeds of time. It's lost in history.
So the story evolved. You're saying the story,
like a meme.
Yes, well, that's interesting.
You know what else was like this as well? Anti-Semitism, honestly, which sounds bizarre. More on that later.
Evolved to match the contours of the human memory. That's exactly it, is that these stories, that's part of their archetypal nature. Like, so they have a emotional and motivational expression, but as they propagate across time, they also evolve, so they're maximally memorable. And they're maximally memorable for a biological reason.
Well, that's very interesting. If they really did evolve over time, if you could actually trace successive manuscripts, you can't do that. I mean, there's presumably a couple of Hebrew manuscripts and a Greek one, and I mean,
fuck, I was like, shit, my dog is getting antsy. I feel like we covered a lot of the base stuff until we do the other part of the video, but I have to take this dog out for a walk. So be right back. Love you. Bye.